Well, hello there, everyone. It's Christy. Hope you are having a good day, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on whatever time it is you are. Welcome to Weekend Winters, the periodic show that I do on a weeknight. Last time we listened to some music from Quadeca. This time I want to look at a PragerU video and try something out based on a show from last week's Weekend Winters on Sunday, where I looked at some points about discourse analysis that ended up being sort of relevant a little bit later on in the show. This time I thought I'd be more explicit, and by looking at these questions from Guy's book from 2011, The Seven Building Tasks of Language, in his book Introduction to Discourse Analysis, and we're going to look at a couple of these while we watch a PragerU video. I'm doing this now because I just didn't want to do it on the live show in case it didn't go well, so I thought I would try it out first. So this is really, I'm just very chill, that's why I don't have the camera on. It's been a long week and I didn't want to do the lighting and everything else, so I just put my picture up there in the corner. I've got my little, hydration next to me and I'm just chilling out, so this isn't going to necessarily be, it's not going to be unprofessional, but if it doesn't go well, then it's going to be a learning experience for all of us. Shall we get started? By the way, I want to say hi to some people in the chat. I see Pris is in the chat, Mithril, and Matthew. So hello, everybody. All right, if you guys were there for the Sunday live stream, you'll know this already. If not, I'll go ahead and explain it. And to my guinea pigs, yes, thank you guys. Oh, Marco's in the chat too. Hello. Guy wrote a book about discourse analysis. I've used it in my own work. And I also found it incredibly useful as an introduction to qualitative analysis when working with students that I taught qualitative research methods to. And with that in mind, I thought we would connect this to a reaction video because it's quite easy to do off-the-top reaction videos, and they're a popular format on YouTube. But as you guys know, I'm a social scientist, and even when I'm not practicing, I'm doing data analysis or designing research or anything, all those pieces of information, techniques, and tools are still there. And that does sometimes impact the way I perceive information as it comes in. And I thought it might be kind of fun to show you guys how to do recreational social science. So as a disclaimer, nothing in this video in terms of analysis should be taken as peer review content. This is what we would call exploratory qualitative analysis, definitely with a left-wing bent, because I'm not here to be a neutral social scientist and do discourse analysis. I'm combining these techniques with a critique from the left. And I'm taking you guys along for the ride. The other thing that I want to say before we get started, and then we will, is that it's almost impossible to keep all of these tasks of language in mind while we watch videos. And sometimes a video will be more relevant to a certain form of analysis than others. But to remind ourselves what the 7 building tasks of language are, let's go through the notes here. And these I've linked below. You can go under and click on the link yourself after the video if you'd like, and look through them. They are very similar to the notes that I took and covered in my lecture, because they come right from Guy's book. I mean, he actually just sort of like organizes them in this way, which is super, super helpful, because it's easy to disseminate then and explain without having to go to the text, as he makes these bullet points. But one task that he labels as significance looks to see the way that language can render some aspects of whatever the content is more significant or less significant. And some research questions that could come out of this form of analysis is, how is language being used to make some things significant or less significant? Practices. People can actually use language to signal certain activities or practices. And this, in a really obvious way of doing this as an example, if people are on, let's say, a court and they're playing basketball and it's 5-on-5, and someone jumps in and tries to, join the game, they're not going to be allowed to, because that's not how the game works. And so we describe things, and certain people are considered players and certain people aren't. Some people are allowed to do some things, other people aren't. And all of this is communicated right through language to describe what's happening on the field. So in a similar way that we use language to structure roles in society in real life, we can also do that in our communications. Identity. Language can signal a certain identity of oneself or of others. And a possible research question is, what identity is this language enacting? What is this language attempting to enact in terms of the speaker or the writer when it comes to their identity or the identity of others? Relationships. Language can signal the types of relationship the speaker has or wants to have with others. And the research questions are really just rephrasing the description in a question. So, how paying attention to how language, what types of relationship in the language are being enacted or wanting to enact or seeking to enact. Politics. Language is in the form of power, and control can signal what is correct and good behavior. So what is being communicated as being right or good. Connections. Language can be used to draw connections between certain things, ideas, or to even disconnect things, saying these things are not connected. And we can analyze how people use language to make one thing relevant or make it irrelevant to other things. And then signs and systems of knowledge. This can favor one language or sign system over others. So speaking in, let's say, a scientific language, using scientific terms in that way. And so we can analyze, how does language privilege or disprivilege signs, specific sign systems. I think for this one, we should probably look at significance. PragerU, I think a good one to pay attention to would be significance, identities, and politics. So language making things more significant or less significant, signaling a certain identity of oneself or identity of others, and language in the form of power and control. So here, trying to tell you what's good, right, and proper. So what is being communicated as being good or right? Those are the questions. We're going to try to pay attention to those 3 as we watch this and see what we can analyze from how they use language in this PragerU video. And the one that we're going to be taking a look at is a political science one. I can't remember the name of it right now, but and we're in a playlist, so we're just going to have to go with this. All right, I'm sure we'll get to the title soon.
If someone suggested to you that Americans should reject representative government and return to the rule of kings, you would laugh. This is America, you would say. In our revolution, we got rid of monarchy. And of course you'd be right, but only to a point.
Okay, so here, we just stop here and looking at politics, right? They're privileging the idea of overthrowing monarchy and associating that with America. In terms of identity, they're identifying Americans with this anti-monarchical structure of power. And they're saying that this is important. Okay.
Monarchy is making a comeback, though not in the way you think. Let me explain. A king is one person, Get rid of him, and you might get your freedom back. But what do you do when the nation has come to be controlled by thousands of little kings, almost supreme in their specialized fiefdoms, who have vast power over your life?
Okay, so what are they doing with this language? It seems to be they are talking politics in terms of, well, identities. They're associating the idea of a king and a sole individual person. Now, with being analogous to all of these little fiefdoms. All right, so those are the identities and also the relationships that they're trying to associate here. And obviously they think this is important, so they're sort of explaining this to us. So we'll see where they go with this. Okay.
Much as a king might. Good question, because that's what we're up against. This regime is called the administrative state. Its little kings are unelected bureaucrats.
All right, so they're talking about kings, and what was that phrase they used here?
This regime is called the administrative state.
All right, so they've now used this phrase, administrative state, and they're giving it a significance by defining it as a form of kingship. And they're also, so identity, significance, again, and then we're going to be seeing them use this term of unelected bureaucrats and linking that relationship, I would assume, to some sort of lack of freedom. And this is being phrased currently in ways that seem negative to me, that we should be afraid of this.
Its little kings are unelected bureaucrats, officially known as administrators, secretaries, or even czars. And make no mistake, they are very powerful. Their decisions affect us every day. The FDA, the FCC, the SEC, and so on and so on. Put together almost any 3 or 4 random letters, and chances are you've stumbled on a government agency.
Okay, so you can see they're drawing connections here between these regimes, unelected bureaucrats, unaccountability, and government agencies. They're also, in some ways, making them significant, less significant by mocking them, saying there's so many of them. If you put any 3 letters together, you'll get a government agency. So obviously, this is just some of the ways that they're using. We can look at the ways they use language to create their narrative.
These agencies and the people in them shape our lives, often for the worse.
Right, so this is the second time they talk about they're impacting our lives every day. And here he's saying it again in every part of our life. And he's also giving it a politics. He's saying it's bad, it's negative. Right, so again, these associations they're making between what I would say are government officials who are enacting the laws as passed by a democratically elected Congress and signed by a president, but he's not brought up anything about democracy. So far, the only associations, the connections that we see him using in his language is between sort of monarchy, kingship, and these bureaucrats.
Many farmers in California lost their livelihoods because the Fish and Wildlife Service decided that the Delta smelt, a tiny fish, was more important than the farmer's water supply.
Right, you can see right, that they're using again politics and relationships between these events as if it just seems rather arbitrary. They're not providing any context, anything like that. They're connecting the actions of this agency to the unemployment of farmers because of some small fish. So they're also again here doing politics. What is being communicated as good? Well, what's good is employment. And even if that apparently is at the cost of the environment, which is for everybody, not just a few farmers.
That decision may have been right or it may have been wrong. My point is simply that the decision should have been made by our lawmakers, who are accountable to us at the next election.
Okay. Right, so now he's saying that when the government agencies enact the laws under the power of the executive that has appointed somebody to run their department and make these decisions, that's somehow not democratic. Also, the legislative bodies can change the laws at any time to disempower the agencies from having this thing. But okay, all right, so he's setting up here a dichotomy between bureaucrats enacting laws passed by the legislature and the legislatures themselves. It seems to me a false dichotomy, but this is PragerU. So what do you expect?
Those farmers are among the millions of hardworking people directly hurt by the administrative state.
Just by the way, notice that he doesn't have a substantiation yet for that these decisions hurt people. They're mostly bad. And he's got another assertion here saying that these government decisions hurt millions of people, but no citations as of yet.
And many more millions have been indirectly hurt, such as all those discouraged from even starting a business by miles of bureaucratic red tape. This is not an argument against government regulation per se, but against regulation imposed by bureaucrats rather than by our elected lawmakers.
Okay, so again, this is really deceptive. They are authorized by the legislative bodies when they draw up the laws about who's going to do what. But as you can see now, what he's connecting here is legislative bodies with legitimacy and bureaucrats with illegitimacy and tyranny. So these, again, it's the same theme over and over again, but now we have a framework for understanding what they're doing, how they're doing it, by the way that they're using language to make things significant or not, to structure identities, and to communicate their politics to us.
Whom we can hold accountable at the next election.
That also, can I just say, the idea that we hold our representatives accountable, if you look at the power of incumbency, 90+ people who get elected once stay in office because there are so many built-in advantages of incumbency in terms of fundraising and networking all the time. So the idea that somehow that that elections themselves will allow us to hold people accountable when the structures are really set up to protect incumbents is pretty naive and deceptive. This law professor needs to study some political science.
Here's the larger danger. As bureaucracy grows, individual freedom diminishes.
More politics. He's just made an assertion. He's setting up a dichotomy between these two ideas, and of course he's favoring one over the other. So I don't really want to repeat myself over and over again because he's not really making any new points. He's just taking the original thesis and repeating it at this point.
How did we get into this mess? And more importantly, how do we get out of it? America's founders recognized the problem. They didn't like being told what to do by people they hadn't voted for. They built all kinds of protections into the U.S. Constitution.
All right, so again, we're constructing the idea of identity and not being told what to do, and government officials enforcing the laws or acting on the laws as being tyranny. All right, so this is more identity creating and more relationships between ideas and more politics.
Starting with its very first line after the preamble. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and House of Representatives. All legislative powers, not some. This means only Congress can make the nation's laws.
I'm just going to point out that enacting and enforcing the laws is not different from is different from making the laws. I feel like I'm stating something really super obvious that we should all see, but because he seems to be putting these in opposition, I just have to point out what problems I have with it.
Congress thus cannot divest itself of that power to a bureaucracy. And that's how America...
Citation needed. We've always had administrative officials acting out laws, and people also can sue, and the legislature can change the laws at any time if they don't like them. Again, I'm sorry, I'm getting caught up in the content and not the analysis, but obviously here he's reinforcing and now trying to state that the Constitution somehow supports his very poor thesis.
Operated for most of its first 100 years. This changed when many Americans, such as Woodrow Wilson, fell in love with centralized bureaucratic power.
Oh, I see. Okay, right. This is government was all okay until it was decided that we needed a welfare state. Okay, all right, that's where this is going. Okay, so now the new enemy here, the administrative state, is going to be Wilson and the idea of administrative powers and social programs. Got it. Okay, I see where he's going.
Wilson was a university professor before he moved into politics and eventually became president in 1912. A self-described progressive reformer, he was impatient for power. He wasn't interested...
All right, so he was both a progressive reformer and impatient for power. Interesting that he puts those two things together, those connections, right? language can draw connections between certain things or disconnect them. Here he's connecting this progressive with desire for state power. Again, no citations here. I'll check the video for links or whatever else, but so far this is just a fantasy. This is a bedtime story, not reality.
In persuading the American people to come over to his point of view. That would take too long. So instead, he aimed to shift lawmaking power out of Congress and into the hands of a professional class of government workers, in other words, bureaucrats.
I think that's called modernization, the modern state. Maybe that's what he's opposed to, the idea of a modern state.
Franklin Roosevelt, who served in Wilson's cabinet, perfected his mentor's vision when he became president.
Right, all the progressives are bad. That's the connection, also the politics of this.
For him, as for Wilson, there were few problems that administrative power couldn't solve. FDR's presidency produced an alphabet soup of new government programs that vastly expanded the administrative state. And since then, it has grown even more dramatically.
I guess because he thinks he set up the idea that, anything administrative is bad, the assumption here is that the growth of badness now is associated with this. More connections, again, the same thing.
Congress still passes laws, but it leaves it to the bureaucracy to fill in the gaps. And these gaps can be enormous. Consider, for example, the Affordable Care Act of 2009, what came to be known as Obamacare. The bill itself was over 2,500 pages, but Congress left much unspecified. So career government officials, elected by no one, went to work. And by 2013, there were an additional 10,000 pages of regulations.
Now, you notice that he doesn't, here, what he's signifying, what he's saying is significant here is the size of the pages. He's not really analyzing the content. It's just because it's more, this more must be bad. That's a connection he's making, that when there's more precise language, that's a bad thing.
So how do we rein in these faceless monarchs?
Wow, he's not even trying to make an argument anymore, like he's unbiased or anything. He's just right in there, oh wow, this is such propaganda. It really is.
First, Congress should actually do its job and take responsibility for the laws it passes. Don't hold your breath. But they at least could do this. Congress should end legal immunity for bureaucrats who abuse their power.
What? Okay, so we imagine Congress trying to pass technical language of over 12,000 pages for Obamacare. It would just not work. It would just be completely not work if you don't allow the administrative rules to be written as to how the law is to be implemented. And of course, a government that doesn't function is precisely what reactionaries want. But yeah, this turn into ending legal immunity for bureaucrats who abuse their power, he hasn't shown any examples of people abusing their power. He showed an example of the fish and wildlife people enforcing some sort of endangered species regulation. Presumably that was based on the law of California that was passed in the legislative bodies and signed by the governor. And adding pages to the Obamacare Act in terms of the administrative rules. So I guess maybe we'll find out. Maybe he'll have one real world example here that is actually relevant.
If they know they can be sued, they'll be a lot more sober about imposing rules others have to live by.
Wait a minute. So if a government employee does his or her job and a private citizen can sue them for doing their job, then why wouldn't they also be able to sue the legislators or the governor who passed the law? Because that's not allowed. There's a law protecting them from personal immunity from people holding them accountable in that way, and yet he wants to he wants to eliminate that kind of protection for people who are merely following the rules as written based on the laws passed by the democratically elected Congress, or legislative body and executive.
Second, the courts should do their job. They must follow the law. That means protecting our constitutional freedoms, including our right to representative government. No more bureaucratic rulemaking. And finally...
What? There's not even a case here! Alright, I'm sorry, again, I'm losing the plot and the content. But here, he's just throwing out the idea that the courts aren't doing these things. So, in terms of, just he's making stuff up, which isn't covered under here, but he's certainly, again, with the politics, making a lot of associations on what is good, even though it's completely impractical, and he's not even shown that there's a real problem. Oh my god, is this garbage? How is this guy a law professor? Seriously. Is he, like, got a visiting degree there? Because this is just nonsense.
Finally, we have to do our job. We must assert our freedom in conversation, on the web, and in the courts.
But what about in the elections that he said, the Democratic elections that he said was the primary thing that was the solution? We're just supposed to talk about it, outline, and sue people? That's the solution? That's... Oh wait, maybe he'll just say, and vote out people. We'll see. Maybe he does it.
We don't want to be ruled by...
No, he didn't. The thing he said he wanted as a solution, which is for people to hold their representatives accountable. He doesn't even bring it up as a solution for what an everyday person can do. I see Data Portal Doll just said maybe he's a lawyer in maritime law. Possibly. Or contract law. Or whatever. Civil forfeiture. I don't know, but it certainly isn't constitutional law.
A king or thousands of little kings. As the founders would have said, no regulation without representation.
Oh, what a load of crap.
I'm Philip Hamburger, professor of law at Columbia Law School.
And I'm embarrassed for Columbia Law School. All right, so... Wow. All right. We saw in this that he was definitely using the tactic of using language to make things significant, combined with a politics of what he thought was good. He also made a lot of efforts to create relationships using language, concepts of unelected monarchies and the bureaucratic or the administrative state and unelected bureaucrats. He was definitely creating identities, both for himself, because he's the reasonable one, rational one, right? He sees all the problems. And also he was using language to demonize progressives and bureaucrats along the way. And making connections between certain things, you know, like monarchy and administrative rules. Wow. Yeah. So in terms of this video, there are a lot of elements of discourse analysis that we can apply to the text to help us more easily systematize the ways in which Prager University, in this case, starts off with a set of values and then tries to build a narrative that supports their values with language, not with evidence. So let me see if I can figure out which video this is. Just to be fair, I will look to see if they've put any kind of like sources. All right, here we go. Well, we're gonna click here. Bonus content. Their Pragerpedia. Oh my god, it must be nice to be a billionaire funding one of these propaganda machines. Advertising. Buy our shit. Help us make money on Amazon. Visit our website. The script. Yada yada. I'm not seeing anything that isn't advertising. Or a source. We've got then what he says. And a link to the full script. So, of course, he didn't really give any examples. Oh, no, there was the example of Fish and Wildlife thing. And there was the example of the Obamacare thing. Neither of which seem to be sourced here. And this is typical. This what I also found in the last PragerU video that I looked at, which is they're garbage. They're really super garbage. All right, I wasn't planning on this going very long, but I did want to get some feedback from the chat as to whether or not you found this. I mean, we were doing a reaction video anyway, but did you find the added element of the discourse analysis useful at all? Because if it's not, then we can just do reactions. But if you guys thought that it did add something that you wouldn't have otherwise thought, then we can continue to use the 7, what was it again? 7, I want to get it right. 7 building tasks of language. So let's see, we've got people tagging me in the chat. Hello, Memento Mori. I already said hi to Data Portal Doll, I think. K9 in the house. PragerU is the worst signaling of identity. Yes. UT is there. 250 in the house. Yeah, let's go back to 1790s level of industry regulation. That's a good idea. Precisely. Back when we had child labor, back when we had dangerous machines that people would get maimed at work. You know, PragerU, I remember this. It really stuck out. Maybe it was because it had to do with a survey result and that was my interest. But there was a survey of children of, you know, working during the Industrial Revolution, you know, when kids were still allowed to work in factories from a very young age. And people were pointing, or the industrialists were saying, oh, kids said that they would rather work in a factory than go to school. But what wasn't factored in to that was that kids at that age who went to school only went to school because they were injured in a factory accident and it meant they couldn't work anymore. So going to school is what you did after you were maimed. So, you know, maybe that had an influence on how people answer the question. Pris says it's a bad sign when a law professor starts to sound a lot like a sovereign citizen. Hell yeah. Yeah, precisely. And Data Portal, sorry, it said Data Portal. I keep saying portal. I don't know. There's too many L's. Data Portal says, I find it more interesting, the analysis. It gives more depth. I mean, it's your wheelhouse, so usefulness is a gray area. I'll leave that to everyone else. Well, if people like the recreational social science, don't mind me nerding out and looking back at the analysis and trying not to get caught up only in the words, but also in what he is trying to do with his words and using that framework, then I'll keep it going on. That's going to be it. It would be about a half an hour. Oh, look at this. 30 minutes on the nose. How brilliant am I? Yeah, this is perfect. All right, so then maybe if you liked this, you should stop by my channel on Sunday or after I broadcast on Sunday. I will then try to make this maybe a regular feature toward the end of the show, closer to the 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time on a Sunday, but don't get up early on a Sunday morning for my show, please. Otherwise, thanks you guys for stopping by. A very late last minute hangout that I set up here. I appreciate it. If you didn't catch the happy hour, that was aired last night on this channel, and Kevin is going to be on the Angie Speaks channel at some point in the near future. So thank you guys for being my guinea pigs. Appreciate it much. I hope to see you guys on Sunday. I've been Christy. You've been awesome. Have a great rest of your day, afternoon, or evening, wherever, whenever it is where you are. All right. Oh, bye, Maury. Just go back and watch the whole thing. You just got here. It's okay. Don't worry. Just go back and rewind it and watch the whole thing. All right. That's it. I'm really saying goodbye, guys. Goodbye.